Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Abaseh Mirvali, and I'm here with Maryam Eisler to my right, and Bashar Al-Shroogi further. Today we're missing Maya Rassamni, who unfortunately could not be with us this afternoon due to some family incident, but the transcript of her answers will be in the book that will be published by Canvas editorial at the end of the 3 panels that will be happening between now and next December around the world. So we're going to start, the format is going to be, there's actually about several questions. I'm first going to let Maryam go through the first series of questions. They're the very same questions that will be posed to Bashar. As we are speaking, you're going to just see a loop of images of works in both of their collections, and I believe Maya's as well. And then Bashar will answer, and then there will be a second question, and then we'll open it so you all have the opportunity to ask our guests some questions. So Maryam, I'd like to start with, do you seek art that has a national identity, or are you more attracted to art that is not bound by labels, such as time or geographic identity?
In my personal collection, I seek art which is very close to my heart. In the case of Iran specifically, I left Iran 30 years ago, and I feel that by collecting art from that region and from my own country, it's an opportunity to reconnect culturally with my heritage and with my roots. And there needs to be a dialogue between what I collect and what I see, in the sense that I don't need to tick boxes. I don't have a must-have tick. Everything that I collect has to be emotionally resonant with myself. And of course, it brings back memories of nostalgia and my childhood and so forth. So it's very, very important. But what's very important is that I think, as a collector, in my personal case, I need to move away from the dogmas and the stigmas of Western-imposed cliches. And I think there's a very big danger as far as concepts of Orientalism and Neo-Orientalism, such as, for instance, the concepts that were put forth by Edward Said. There's a quote that I'd like to put forth, and he said that Orientalism creates a divide between the East and the West. My contention is that Orientalism is fundamentally a political doctrine willed over the Orient, and as a cultural apparatus, Orientalism is all about aggression, judgment, and will to truth. So it's very important that in our region, we keep away from ghettoizing, that we collect with the idea of vision and not division, and that we very much move away from localization beyond territorial and philosophical boundaries.
So do the labels have a negative connotation for you, such as the ones that even are in the title of the panel, or are they markers for you to be aware of?
I think they're simply markers that we need to be aware of. As an example, for instance, I can take the example of the veil, which is used very predominantly as a symbol of the art of the region. And if we look at the Western Orientalism, veil was always looked as an element of fetish, as a form of discovery. It was an obsession. What lies behind that veil? Whereas since September 11th specifically, there's been a move, and it's become a symbol of the aggression and of the extremism, of unfortunate extremism of our region. So that we've had a shift from the concept of the veil symbolizing desire to the veil symbolizing fear.
It's
and,
true. Mystery,
you know, this is an issue. Now, what I'd like to see, of course, is in the long term that we move away from all these concepts and that we have art which sits side by side, international art, around thematic concerns, not around symbolism, if you may, or particular stigmas like the veil or war or tension or so forth.
How has that influenced you, particularly in your collecting, with images that we might be seeing of works that you have in the collection? How have these, you not sticking to labels, but more looking in general, things that appeal to you in an intellectual way or in a passionate way, how has that influenced your particular collecting?
I think maybe I'd like to bring out just one point or one aspect of my collection, which is a focus on female artists. And I'd like to bring out the example of Chadors. I had a very interesting talk with her not too long ago. And I asked her, I said, you know, you've reached a certain level in your career. Wouldn't it be time for you to take an one-year residency and move away and maybe move to the West and look at the different perspective from the West onto the East. And she said, Maryam, I could never, ever do that, because what drives me and what drives my creativity is precisely that constant daily routine tension and aggression, and without that I couldn't produce. So I just find that stands very interesting from a female perspective. And of course, you know, that's a very, very large topic which we can't get into, but you know, it is interesting to have a focus on the female perspective within our societies, and in Iran especially, where there's this dichotomy, if you may, between, you know, the public life and the private lives of these women, who are often veiled on the outside and very unveiled from within.
Right. Do you find what she said to be something that you would be able to extend to other Iranian women artists or other women artists from the region? Is this a sentiment that you think might be shared from the work you've done in the region?
I think it's very shared, and I think that, of course, there's the female sensitivity that comes into play. And even if we pick another artist from the Arab region, like Mona Hatoum, for instance, you know, it's not the concept of the veil necessarily, but it's the concept of this displacement, if you may. And if you look at, for instance, one of her early videos, which is the famous 18-minute video that she did, which was this conversation between a mother and a daughter during the Lebanon War.
Right.
The mother being in London and the daughter being in London and the mother living in Lebanon, and this constant tension as a result of the war and the impact of the war on the lives of families and the aggression that it caused within families. You know, that's another topic which, again, is interesting to look at from a female aspect. So yes, it covers it throughout the ground. So really, it's important that, for me, ultimately, we look at art as a vanguard of creativity, and that we almost art as the new weapon that can overcome politics, that it can overcome the East-West divide, and that we can ameliorate our misconceptions and distrust. And I'm very, very pleased to see that we now have examples of the US administration, such as Obama, of course, President Obama, who are leaning towards that direction. And I loved his quote in his Nowruz address, where he said, you know, over centuries, directing it to the Iranian population, over the centuries, your art, your music, literature, and innovation have made the world a better and more beautiful place. And I would love for this thought to be carried throughout the region and, you know, forward, basically.
For those that you might not be familiar with Persian and other cultures in the region, Nowruz is the first day of the new year. It's the spring, and President Obama, for the first time in decades, acknowledged that it's a day of celebration in several cultures in the Near East and the Middle East. So ultimately, some of the labels that we use in the panel title are political labels, and you do see a lot of the artistic work being done in the region as political work as well.
Absolutely. It has to be almost at the moment. Yes.
They're intrinsically
intertwined.
So as a collector, how do you perceive the development of artistic trends, the artists and the artistic community in the region, and in particular where you focus most of your collecting?
Of course, any art, in my opinion, is an expression of the society that one lives in. It's a snapshot of life as artists live it on a day-to-day basis. But in our case, and in our region specifically, there's a strong focus on what I would call possibly fatalism or neo-fatalism, which is very much linked to the Shiite concept, the Islamic concept of, you know, we are here up to our fate, and we're almost awaiting the arrival of the chosen one to liberate us. This concept of martyrdom is very, very important in our culture, and I see that very much translated into the art that's being produced at the moment. And of course, it's very easy for us all to be sitting here in sanitized societies, in a privileged position, talking about these concepts, which are very dear to the heart of our artists in the region.
Right.
For those guys, what matters is their freedom of expression on a daily basis. They don't have freedom beyond the canvas, and the canvas is where they share that freedom. And we need to be very sensitized to that point. They produce to make a living and to eat at the end of the day, and we should take that into account when we speak about these concepts.
And as far as what changes do you foresee? What changes do you foresee do you foresee a movement away from the socio-political as communities, as nations become more stable, certain nations that maybe move away from the religious aspect into more secular state? Do you see these issues kind of dissipating? And
I certainly hope so, and I'd like to draw a parallel possibly to the Chinese movement, of which I was quite part of as I collect Chinese contemporary art. And when I compare the nascence of Chinese contemporary artists versus Iranian contemporary artists, it's very interesting for me to see that the Chinese have moved away from that political content.
right.
I don't see that happening right now in our region because there's still a lot of very strong tension and war, and I would like to see the end of it, but it's not happening right now. But the future, yes, of course. In the case of Iran, 70% of the population is under the age of 30. It's a very young population. They need to move away. They need to move away from that typecast and from the prison that they live in and look forward and look to a freer world and a freedom of expression. So I would, yes, the answer would be good.
Putting it in the historical context maybe with Iran, do you think that this tremendous burst of creativity and this spirit that has flourished post-revolution, though, has a lot to do with the circumstances born of revolution?
Yes, of course. I mean, without doubt.
I mean, because it is a culture that's rich in a history of art and
very
music,
much so. I mean, in fact, it makes me very angry at the moment when people talk about the discovery of contemporary Iranian art. It is not a discovery. It's, in fact, it's a recovery after a 30-year absence or death. You know, we're talking about a heritage and a culture that is 2,500 years old. If you take the example of the 60s and 70s, modern art was very buoyant. We have a prime example sitting among us, Kamran Diba, who was, you know, behind the whole establishment of that art movement in the country with the establishment of the Contemporary Art Museum in Tehran and that very buoyancy that was apparent in those ages. And then, of course, we had the revolution and everything died. So it is not a discovery, it's a recovery. And I'd like to very much point that out. You know, we're not a cultural backwater as a region, and in Iran in particular.
But definitely a more vibrant one, I would say.
Definitely.
Definitely a more sophisticated one. So would you like to say a few words about your collection in general? I'm sure some people are curious. Why Chinese? Why did you go far east?
It was fresh. It resonated well. I think, again, it's a result of some turmoil. I guess I get attracted to areas of the world that have experienced turmoil, and China obviously did that. I'm attracted to our region because there is turmoil, and turmoil, by definition, induces interesting thoughts, interesting ideas, and creativity. So there's definitely a parallelism where I would say that the parallelism really lies in the concept of the children of the revolution.
Okay.
The artists from China and from the Middle East are truly children of the revolution, and that's what's attractive.
Thank you. Bashar, do you seek art that has a national identity, or are you more, you know, attracted to art that has no labels, time or geographical?
With me, the way that I've actually built the collection and my approach to collecting art is, the first thing that I look for is art that is relevant. So the art actually has to speak to me. And when I really look at or approach a piece of art, I don't look at who it's made by or where that person might come from. The first thing is that it has to be relevant, and then I need to be able to connect with that piece. Once the connection is there, then to me good art is good art, regardless of the national boundaries of where the piece comes from. Now, when I approach a new piece, it's always how does that piece fit back into the international contemporary art collective that I have. And at the end of the day, if that piece is something that I've connected with, whether it comes from Lebanon or from the Gulf, or if it comes from China, or if it comes from Chile, it really is a question of how does it fit back into that collective, and how does it enhance that collective? How does it make it a little bit better? So the regional boundary doesn't really come, or the regional delineation comes much later. It just happens to be a good piece of art that I respect, that I connect to, that comes from this part of the world. It doesn't really, the national boundary doesn't come first.
But does that have something to do with how your collecting started for you?
I think part of it might have something to do with that because, you know, with me when I first started collecting, the vision was always outwards. It wasn't really looking in. It was always a way of discovering the world around me by the art that is presented back to us. So it's a way of finding out more about different cultures or about different parts of the world by reading into it through their art.
Right.
And because of that, it was always, well, now that I have that, now that I've got that international collection, how do I then fit back the identity of who we are within the region? And how do you reflect that through the art that you're collecting? And I think that's always been very important to us because we live in a very global society today. It's a very international society. So it's how do we then reflect that back into that international society through the art that the region produces?
How would you then use the other labels that we use in the title of this? How about gender? How do you view the word gender? What does it signify to you,
You know,
as far as collecting goes?
It's quite interesting because it's come up now, the question of gender, the question of wars, and how does that fit into the art of the Middle East today?
Right.
But if we look at the question of gender, and it's not necessarily looking at the issue of feminism or the theme of feminism, but gender as gender has been present throughout the arts from time immemorial, and we can go back and look at pieces where you're looking at masculinity being glorified or being hero, you know,
right.
the heroes of a movement. And this goes back to the classical period. We can go back even as far as, you know, the art of the ancient Egyptians. You're always looking at the role of gender
right.
and how the masculinity is popping through and femininity is being portrayed differently. It's also a question that is apparent throughout all of history, but also internationally we're seeing that. And we don't even have to go too far. I mean, if we look at probably as recently as the Venice Biennale as an example. And Venice is a time when national identities and demarcations are made very clear right from the very beginning. We look at things such as the Andrei Molotkin piece, The Wings of Victory. And when you see a piece like that that's made out of blood and oil, it's really not dealing with any other subject but the subject of war and how that fits into contemporary society today. Gender is another issue that comes up in a lot of the other international pavilions. I mean, when we see the Danish and Nordic pavilion and you have the gay man who is dead floating in a swimming pool, they are actually dealing with these issues of gender. So it's not just the region that's dealing with them, and it's not just today. Historically, it's been dealt with, and internationally, it's been dealt with.
How do they manifest themselves in your collection?
The way that they really manifest themselves into my collection is they just happen to be there. You know, when we look at the art of the region today, because of the situation that we're in, right. These issues have been brought up to the forefront. Now, one thing that I really like to ask when I look at the stereotype, for example, when we look at something like the veil.
Right.
Probably to pick an example that a lot of people are familiar with would be Lala Saidi's work. Now, when you look at Lala's work, you're looking at the veiled woman, and you're looking at the calligraphy that's shown in the background. I really don't think that what Lala is trying to show us with the calligraphy and with the veiled woman is the stereotype. I think that that discourse has been had. We've had that dialogue. We've gone beyond that. I think what she's doing is rather reversing the stereotype instead of propagating it. So by actually putting the veiled woman in front of you, she's asking you to go a little bit further. It's beyond just the veiled piece in front of you, because we really need to be asking what is, you know, even the basic composition of the pieces, the way that these figures are staged, what does that say about the piece? And there really is, she's really interacting quite strongly with the viewer, because she's either being inclusionary or exclusionary based on your understanding or lack thereof of the language that she's using. When she fills the entire background and the pieces themselves with the calligraphy, it's, do you understand what that calligraphy says?
Right.
And it's an integral part of the piece. So she really forces us to prod a little bit further, to scratch and see what there is behind the surface. And I think in that sense, it's quite important to us because it teaches us about ourselves. From the region, we actually need to go a little bit further and see what is she trying to get across with that message. And with an international audience, it's as relevant, if not more, because she's actually asking you to go a little bit further and see beyond the beauty of the piece itself, what is the message behind it? And she forces you to sort of interact with the piece a little more and ask those questions.
Let me ask you, you're currently residing in Dubai, and a lot of your projects take place in Bahrain.
Between Bahrain and Dubai and the Gulf region is mostly what we're focusing on at the moment.
So how do you perceive the development of the artistic trends, the artistic community, and the artists themselves in the region that you're residing, which in certain ways would be different from Turkey, Iran, and maybe Lebanon?
You know, I think when we look at the Gulf as the Gulf, you've
Yes.
got a thriving art community that's been around for many years. But the one thing that you really need is you need a platform for these artists to be able to move forward with. And I think as you look at what's happening within the region right now, from, you can actually look at this from a top-down perspective or from a grassroots perspective at the same time. We're seeing the museums come into the region. We're seeing more galleries come up and actually open their doors and bring new forms of art into the region. We're seeing even the role of the auction houses within the region has an impact. And then the one thing that you really can't ignore is the role of the media and publications. You're actually able to go out and read a little bit more about the art of the region. So I think as that really comes into place, and over the next few years, we're really seeing this solidify. And it's the top-down perspective and the bottom-up. And as these two meet, I think the artists of the region and the audience themselves are also being educated a lot more. So with that education, we're actually learning a little bit more about the arts. I think if we look at the past 15 or 20 years, the average person now actually has a stronger vernacular to be able to look at the art that they're looking at and to be able to discuss it. It's more than just being able to say, well, I like this piece or I don't like this piece for this reason, but it's actually being able to have that vernacular to be able to take the piece apart, and that's important.
A lot of work is being done internationally to put focus on the region. How about locally? What is happening locally? I mean, there was a great presence of the UAE in Venice, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey. There were many pavilions, but what about at the local level? Still, what more can be done for the artists and the artistic community? I mean, I'm glad you brought up the auction houses, but what are the fairs doing, or lack thereof fairs, or the biennales? How is that going to?
I think collectively, Abaseh, we need to look at all of it being pulled together. And what we're seeing today is more than what we saw 2 years ago. It's more than what we saw 5 years ago. And the direction that we're moving forward in right now is actually quite positive. Whether you're looking at formalized education programs that are coming into the region, or you're looking at talks that happen sporadically and are not, are done in different places,
right.
It really does help to have all of that come together. So what we're seeing is actually, like I said, I keep coming back to it, but it really is the grassroots initiatives that are making a greater difference. It's people themselves opening up their collections for the first time to the public. And one thing that I really believe very strongly in is the power of actually putting somebody in front of a work of art. And the first time that you're actually confronted with a piece, it can be quite a humbling experience. And it's beyond just seeing the pieces projected on a screen, it's beyond seeing them published in a book. The power of actually putting somebody in front of the piece itself is quite important. So education happens on many levels. Part of it really is people actually sharing their own collections and saying, come in and take a look at this work. And I want you, by doing that, to understand why I think it was powerful, why it was strong for me. So there's a lot of people that are doing that at multiple levels.
So would both of you agree that maybe the role of the fair or the role of the biennale or role of an auction house kind of changes a tad bit in the region because there's this greater need to be putting people in front of the art? The access is not so easily as if you were in New York or in London, where you can, even for free, enter many places and have access to art. Do you see this as a positive, or?
Well, if I can say, as far as the auction houses are concerned, I think they've certainly put the art on the map. They make people talk about it. As to how they go about doing it, that's a whole separate discussion, and there's a whole ethical aspect about that.
We'd like that next time, by the way.
Maybe that's for instance, cases of auction houses going directly to the artists and bypassing the whole system. The system is very, very important. It needs to work together. You need to have the private side work hand in hand with the commercial side, which is the gallery end, and you need those two factors working very closely with the institutional side.
Yeah.
And the auction house needs to adhere to that, in my personal opinion. Once you start bypassing those issues, then you get into a whole ethical dilemma. So that's the question mark that I have. But as to making a referencing, educating, making the art more available, more visible, and talk about it, yes, absolutely.
What do you think, Bashar?
In terms of the role of the
all three of them. Fairs,
of them?
Fairs are just as important because they are another venue for people to be seeing. We have art to buy. This year we had Charge
the role of the art fair and the biennale is paramount within the region, because to me, it's quite important to bring artwork from all around the world and actually be able to show it to the artists within the region. So for a lot of people that don't have access to these pieces, that are not able to travel, that are not able to see these pieces abroad, it's very important to be able to walk through an art fair and experience the artwork or experience the work that is being produced in other parts of the world. It definitely inspires the artists that are working within the region, and it does broaden the horizons. It forces them to ask the question of, well, who am I and how do I fit back again into this international collective? So I think the role is quite important. The biennales are just as important as well. And we are seeing more and more of them come up in the region, and we're seeing them get a lot more cosmopolitan and international.
Okay. Well, I'd like to touch upon philanthropy and looking at it from a bit of a different perspective. Philanthropy more as a tool, as a mechanism for change. Both of you and Maya are involved in organizations or in activities that are in some way philanthropic with different ends. So more than philanthropy, yes, it's a great thing. I would like each of you to maybe address, we'll start with you, Maryam, philanthropy as a tool that you're using to make changes within the community and in the international community to bring attention on the artists, the artistic work that is being done in the region.
I think that the role of the collector has to go beyond the monetary contribution, either to, well, basically the monetary contribution towards the art. I think we all have a responsibility, if you may, to open doors and make things happen for the artists on all sorts of levels. So personally, the aspects that have been of interest to me personally have been getting involved in book projects. So the referencing aspect that we were talking about is very key, because that's one thing that very much lacks in our region. And as good or bad as these projects may be, the initiatives are positive, and they're putting a stamp on the region, and it's a start. So these reference books then get used by collectors, by institutions, and they're very, very strong educational tools. So referencing is very important. Then the contact and the involvement with the institutions is very important. So to make art from our region be known and within the Western institutional artwork. So
how do you find that you're being received? For example, I think you're working with the Tate. They
Yes.
just established a new
It's very
committee.
exciting. For me personally, it's very, very exciting to see the large British institutions such as the Tate, the British Museum. At this very moment, it's literally 10 days old, and we've just started the MENAC group, which is the Middle East North Africa Acquisition Committee at the Tate. The British Museum have just started their patronage in the region as well. And it's very exciting, to see that happening, and that the effort and the emphasis and the financial backup, if you may, the apparatus is in place and the momentum is in place. So we need to really hop on the bandwagon and make it work.
Bashar, how about you? How's your work?
I think
influencing?
we're really approaching education from a different angle here, where we're basically saying that there is value to actually going directly to the individual. So instead of trying to do something with publications, for example, or with referencing, we've gone down to the individual and said, well, how do we actually take somebody that we think has a lot of potential, but is not getting there because they don't have the tools and the means?
Right.
So one of the ways that we are doing that is through residency programs, where we're actually taking the artists that we think are showing a lot of promise, and we're putting them through international residencies.
Right.
So they spend some time working out of the UK. The next step would be for them to spend some time working in Spain. And the last step would be to come back to Dubai and bring all of the influences that they've had, everything that they've been exposed to, and come back to Dubai and produce a body of work at that time. And it's really a very structured program where they are visiting curators, they're visiting artist studios, they're learning, how do I put a show together, what tools do I need, even just the very basic tools of what do I need to survive as an artist. What do I need to know about managing my money, about pricing my artwork? And these very basic, simple tools is what we're focusing on. So the residency programs to me are very important, and it's focusing on the individual and having them be able to come back, because what we're really building is role models, which I think is something that we might not have enough of within the region. So once you've actually educated one person and had them come back, they become a role model for other people to be able to follow. So that to me has been quite important, that the focus on educating people individually has been quite important. The other thing that we work on is the education programs within Dubai, where we invite visiting lecturers from the region and from around the world to be able to come in and engage people in a dialogue and actually get people to talk about the artwork. And we really cover across the board, from very young children, because I believe you really should be exposed to it at a very young age. I was very blessed to have that. So we're really trying to push that from a very young age and then bring it all the way up to older people, to collectors, to students, to young artists, and really push it across the board that way. But it is the contact with the individual that we're going after.
We are very timely people, and it is exactly 3:30, so you all have about 10 minutes for questions. There are other personalities from the region here amongst you, from the fairs. John Martin's here, so if you have questions that have to do with these issues of identity or what's happening in the region right now, we welcome you to ask.
Hello, my name is Michelle Rogers. I'm an artist. I'm showing at the Hot Art Fair. And I have a couple of things to say. One is I'd really like to thank the people at Canvas, because they always really bring and do great work when they come here. And I think opening up for a lot of artists what's happening over there. But at the same time, and maybe this is just a selfish perspective, but I think it's a common artistic perspective for Western artists, is we look at your area and we think, well, what can we show there, I mean, I do a lot of political art, which I feel could probably go down very well. But the work I have here, for instance, is based on Caravaggio, and it's got drag queens taking up positions of the saints in Caravaggio, and it's got lesbians. And I don't ever feel that I could ever take it,
Are you saying that you feel that it would be censored, that your work would be censored?
I do,
you would have to self-censor yourself
I do,
for
but
the region?
I think a lot of artists feel that way. And therefore, you're talking about the change where Western artists go over there and you guys come over here, and that's what's going to change everything ultimately politically. That's what's going to change everything. But if we feel that totally censored, then we can't.
Would you feel censored if you're going to Turkey, or are you talking about the Gulf
Probably
region?
Less so, I'm Irish. I was actually censored in my own country,
right,
so I understand it.
Because though for the purposes of this discussion and many, you all know that we lump the region together, but these are very marked identities. The cultures that we're talking about are each great in their own and very different. So Turkey as a nation is in a very different place with a secular government that has been in power for a very long time than in a country like Iran, post-revolution,
I would say that, but one of my friends who works for the press was in Egypt recently, and she was at a huge museum, and she was talking about a friend of hers who was Egyptian and was gay, and the woman at the desk said, but we don't have gay people in Egypt. So I gotta say, as a gay person, I mean, there is a level which I would feel great difficulty,
No, you're right, but Miss California also thought the same thing. So, ignorance comes in all shapes.
No, I know that.
But I understand, and that's disheartening, but truly, Miss California just got her crown taken away finally. So, it's a good day. But let me let some of the people comment, and I think your point is very valid, and I think those of us that work in the medium, whether it be Canvas or those of us that are museum directors, curators, and whatnot, are very concerned about art not being censored and artists not feeling that their work would in any way be censored upon entering. That's not the way. But why don't you all address it?
Even if we look at just the Gulf as a region, 10 years ago, you would never be able to walk into a gallery and even see a picture of a nude being hung on the walls. 5 years ago, maybe you would see it in a back room, but it wouldn't be hung right on the wall. This year, you can actually, even right now, as I was in Dubai, you can walk through at least 4 or 5 galleries and actually see nudity being portrayed on the wall. So things are moving along, but you also have to realize that there is a long way to go. But gradually, we are seeing change. And people are getting a little bit more accepting. The work is not being censored as much as it was before, but it will take time.
It has a process.
And there is a danger in moving too fast, because you have to respect the heritage and the culture that comes from that region. And if you look at the case of Iran specifically, what happened when we moved too fast? Culturally, we had a revolution.
Yeah.
So, as you said, slowly but surely, and there is hope.
But I think that as an artist, I would welcome you. I think that the people working in the region whether those of us that are outside of the region, you know, I live in Mexico, or those that are in London, elsewhere, everyone is trying to change. But I think what we've all learned, maybe by our personal experiences of the lives we've led, is that slowly and with compassion, because education is a lifetime process. But thank you. Please.
I just want to balance that remark by saying New York completely rejects me, and not because my work is or isn't pornographic or about sex or erotic, but simply because I am an Arab and simply because I am a Palestinian Arab. And I'm equally censored in that same way in Europe.
Do we have any questions, comments? Did most of you, when the word gender came up, did you assume women? I'm curious. Or did you assume man and woman? Woman? Yeah. Any comments from other personalities from the region that could, what is the experience? John's here, Art Dubai is here, Canvas. I mean, what do you think? How are the developments going? We have a few minutes. We can steal from the next panel.
Well, I mean, just coming, obviously, with this and then coming from Venice, the thing that impressed me was how, for the various pavilions representing the Middle East, or Middle Eastern artists, they were so incredibly well supported, both Venice now and internationally. So I feel that dialogue now, those doors are opening the whole time. So it's been an extraordinary few days. I think this has been a very significant time. And that's something that's been marked in Venice, as well as an ongoing process internationally. So it's more thought.
Well, we want to thank Canvas very much for continuing to promote the dialogue, which is really what's most important. This will be have a second part and a third part coming up in future fairs, and it will be with the artists from the region, and the third one with the curators from the region. So keep an eye open for part 2 and 3, and then it will come out in a book. Thank you so much for coming today.